So, hello and welcome to this EU Food Star webinar series. Sorry, just share my screen. Now, welcome to this EU Food Star webinar series, making Cheesecake the PM way, a basic introduction to project management, organized by the EU Food Star project in cooperation with the ISEKI-Food Association and supported by Elsevier. My name is Line Lindner. I'm from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna, Austria. And the webinar today will be presented by Rainer Schwarzinker from the Food Integrity Studio and from Bucco in Austria. And it will be moderated by Paola Pizzia from the University of Unite in Italy. Sorry. So I will shortly give you an introduction how to use your control panel. Then I will hand over to Paola Pizzia, who will give you an introduction about the Food Star project and about the Food Factory for Us, international student competition. Then we will hand over to Rainer Schwarzinker, who will give his presentations. Questions should please be given in writing during the presentation in order to avoid too much noise in the background. And after the presentation, we kindly ask you to fill in an evaluation. It's a very short evaluation, or in the follow-up email, where we ask you to rate the degree of interest of the topic, the audio quality, the quality of the presentation, and suggestions for further topics. If you have any ideas, any topics you would like to be dealt with in our webinars, please send an email to office@iseki-food.net. So shortly to introduce you to the control panel, you can, in the text field, you should please post your questions in the text field, which will then be answered after the presentation by the presenter. The red button where you can minimize your panel. You can also make a full screen. If you have any problems with the audio quality or anything else, please raise your hand and we will try to deal with it. And all microphones are per standard muted from the beginning. So as I said, if you have questions, please write these. The whole session is recorded. And you can find the recorded version together with a PDF of the presentation on our website, food-star.eu. So now I will give the presenter control to Paola Pizzia, who's from Unite in Italy. She's also a partner of the Food Star project and is responsible for the Food Factory for Us. Please, Paola.
Thank you very much, Line. Can you hear me? Is everything okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just it was just a double check. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce briefly EuFooD Star, the project that is supporting this series of webinars on behalf of the coordinator Gerhard Schleining. The EuFooD Star is a European project, is a European project under the framework of the Erasmus Plus program. Just a moment, because I cannot work. Okay. under the Erasmus Plus framework, and in particular is a Knowledge Alliance project, in which main aim is to try to combine the needs and expectations also of the both universities and food industries. Actually, when we developed this project, it was our aim to close a gap existing between universities and food industries in terms of knowledge transfer, but also higher education and training of the professionals and more in general the workers. So the idea was actually to develop a long-term partnership at European level that obviously is not a simple goal. To this aim, it was developed a consortium, here briefly showed with the different logos, and more in particular, we have partners from universities, food companies, here listed, and covering somehow all Europe, but also beyond. More than this, we have also as partners multipliers and training providers, and overall the project is targeted to industry, to teachers, this means university, academia, but last but not least also the students that are somehow the product of what university is doing, and is the fuel, let's say, also for the activities of the industries. What is needed to be done in order to close the gap, but not only, because from closing the gap we can also enhance the European capacity of innovation. The idea is to develop some skills and development jointly in order to favor somehow the development of the innovation. And to this aim, the idea is to create somehow some regional, local cooperation in terms of clusters, and that work jointly to work to the aims already presented. To this aim, the idea is to develop, to create, and actually we have already done it, some centers actually located in 8 different countries, here you can say, that are coordinated under a main and central EuFooD Staff Center, which is located actually at the University of Hohenheim under the control of the ISEKI-Food Association. Who can be a member of these EuFooD Staff Centers actually are all the project partners, all the associated, but also more and more we have additional contribution and members made of industries, training providers, and universities that overall are partners of this new network of this EuFooD Staff Center that work together and develop jointly some activities. To join, if you're interested, you can make also the application via the link here also presented. This inside within this project, as well as this EuFooD Staff Center, one of our main goal is to, as already told, develop joint activities. And one of these activity actually is this Food Factory for Us international competition that this time is already at the second edition. The first one was rather successful successful with 15 teams. This time we have 12 teams. In this competition, we open a call for teams of students with the support of tutors if needed, but they can also be independently working, and on the development of specific projects on specific topics. Actually, this time, in respect to the last edition, the project's call is on shelf life of foods, formulation changes, innovative processing, biopreservation, use of innovative packaging, in order to enhance or improve shelf life. In such a way, it could be possible also develop some innovative actions, but also work towards the sustainability of the food value chain. We have, thanks to the sponsors, ISEKI-Food Association and GSICA, which is an international, even if it's from Italy, association dealing on food packaging. We have 2 awards that will be given, attributed to 2 projects, one on packaging and the other is on processing. So this particular webinar actually is dedicated to these students, but it has been open also to the wider public because of the main interest and topic. So let's introduce the speaker of today, which is Rainer Svacinka. He is from Austria and has a main expertise in project management and consulting, developed thanks to the collaboration with some consulting companies, but also working in collaboration with universities dealing on European projects. Here are also briefly shown. I don't want to deepen too much this aspect, not because of less important, but because there are very many. And he is also collaborating in EuFooD STA, and this is also a great pleasure for us. Today, however, is the speaker of this webinar that has a very, very challenging title. So I would like to give immediately the floor to Rainer Svacinka and his presentation. Thank you very much, and I'll be here moderating the session after the webinar of Rainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. So now I'll make Rainer the presenter. So please go ahead, Rainer.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. Wonderful. So also from me, hello from Austria, from Vienna. And it's around lunchtime here. So Mahlzeit to all of those of you where it's also lunchtime at the moment. So we have a topic which actually fits pretty well for this time of the day. And we're trying to make cheesecake today the PM way. And well, there won't be any real cheesecake, but at least we will go through the steps of project management on the example of making cheesecake. Some brief words about me. Thank you, Paolo, for the introduction already. I have a background in food and biotechnology and then started working in research project management. So what I did for the last 12 years was helping organizations to start mainly international research, development, and educational projects that cover the 6th and the 7th framework program, Horizon 2020, and now also Erasmus+. So the project, the Foodster project, in which frame we are having this presentation here now, I'm also the project manager and also help to bring up together with the coordinator here at Boku this project. I I'm also the CEO of the Food Integrity Studios. I have also a very close link to the food sector. What we are doing is we are developing digital solutions for the food industry. Let's say, for example, for primary producers to comply with regulations, but also to do a big data analysis with the data they have from their production, for example, to simply improve the quality, to help them improve the documentation. So I'm also working in the food sector, but more here on the digital side with my colleagues. I'm also in there. I have the role of a project manager. It's my colleagues doing the digital solutions. So if you have any questions about the digital solutions, I would have to forward you to my colleagues, but I'm doing this as a project manager. You might say the topic sounds a bit interesting, making cheesecake the PM way. This is based on the so-called IPMA, the International Project Management Association, where I'm a member and I'm also a coach. And the International Project Management Association, they also have activities for their young professionals. So they do have activities for project managers from the age of 20 to 35. And within this frame of those activities, they are always creating trainings, which are usually based on topics where everyone can relate to, such as making cheesecake and making the direct relation to project management. This is simply the purpose because the project managers come from various areas of expertise. They have various backgrounds. They work in different fields. So it's very often very important to have a general topic they can relate to. And based on this topic, such as making cheesecake, we have also other trainings, for example, on how to brew coffee, to discuss and explain the basics. And we're really here talking about the basics of project management. Because when we start talking about more details, then we have to actually really go to the topic that is concerned. But for now, for this basic introduction, and as we have a food project, it wonderfully fits that we're doing cheesecake today. This specific presentation, this specific topic about cheesecake, that was the idea of the IPMA in Latvia, so thanks for them. They came up with it and they are training their young staff with these trainings. So let's jump right into it. This is the, you will get this presentation afterwards because there might be some details you can't read on the bigger slides. But this is basically now the overview of the process, the project management process of making cheesecakes the PM way. And that starts, and this is covering those 4 steps. That starts with the initiation of the whole process, of the whole project. It continues with planning the project, implementing it, and once we're done with the project, that continues with the controlling and the evaluation of the project. Good. When we look at the very first step, the initiation, it's the same as we have for any project, no matter if it's your PhD thesis, your master thesis, if it's an industrial project, if it's a research project, there's always some sort of initiation. So somebody came up with an idea, somebody came up with a funding scheme, somebody has a demand, so there's always some sort of start why you started the project. And so we're here at the very beginning, and as you can see here, you have somehow decided you want to make cheesecake for a friend. So the basic idea could have been that there's a birthday from your friend, or there is maybe a party, or you just want to do your friend a favor. So the basic idea was simply you wanted to make cheesecake for your friend. And if you're approaching it now the project management way, then we would say the initial thing we have to do then is we have to define objectives. We have to say, what do we want to do within your idea of making cheesecake for a friend? And I guess most of you have already heard about this approach, about the SMART approach, so that objectives should be formulated in a so-called SMART way. There are slightly different definitions of what those letters SMART stand for. That's the way I go with, is that objectives, they have to be specific, they should be measurable, accepted, realistic, and timely. And when we look now at the picture, there you see, we said we want to have a classic cheesecake and we want to have it delivered to a friend. That's the objectives we have defined here, plus some additional things where it says it should be light sweet, it should contain fruits or berries, and it should be medium in calories. So we have here, we are very specific. It says like, we want to do a cheesecake. We're actually even that specific that it says it should contain fruits and berries. It should be medium in calories. We have here some measurable things. It says like 1 cheesecake, 12 servings, and delivered to your friends. Another thing would be, for example, here accepted, that you probably have discussed that with your friend before and you've agreed that they all like cheesecake. So you've agreed, it's an accepted goal, it's an objective that this should be a cheesecake, and that should be probably 12 servings, because there will be, I don't know, maybe 6 to 12 people. Either everyone receives 1 piece or 2 pieces. You should make sure that it is realistic. For example, here you see the project time. It says 7 hours and 40 minutes. So you should be it should be realistic enough that you have the time to do that. And also from the budget, it should be realistic. So for example, here you say you come up with a budget of €8, and if that is within what you can afford, then this is fine. So if, for example, there would be a very high budget because somebody is expecting very specific ingredients which are not available at this time, and that would increase your budget and you're not capable of covering this budget, then this would be unrealistic. But in this case, it seems that the budget of €8, that's a realistic thing. It's timely, you have enough time to do it. And with this, you have defined the very basic frame of your project of baking a cheesecake for your friend. Looking a little bit more on the objectives itself, going from the strategic way, usually what we do is we differentiate between more or less 3 types of objectives. We have the main or strategic objective, we have the specific objectives, and we have the so-called non-objectives. The main or the strategic objectives is the overall why. Why are you actually doing this? Why do you want to do that? In this case, it's not more defined in more detail, but this could be in this way, for example, that you want to provide a dessert for a party, or it is simply your birthday routine that you say, like, every time a friend of mine has a birthday party, I will bake some sort of cake for them. So this is your overall strategic objective. This is the overall why. When we go for real big projects, that would be the big strategic goal in the background. Let's say, for example, we want to solve a certain problem in our production. We want to solve a certain issue we have with quality assurance. We want to come up with a new recipe for our product. So this is the overall strategic goal of making, for example, business. And this is not defining any details, but it's the overall goal that your project and your further specific objectives have to work towards. So we continue here with the specific objectives. The specific objectives, quite clear here, is the specific objectives is I want to bake this cake and I want to deliver it to my friend. So this is those specific objectives. They are clearly contributing to the overall objectives of providing a dessert for a party or for fulfilling your birthday routine by baking a cake and then delivering it to your friend. One thing that is quite often actually neglected, and I have to say, like, I usually work in international research projects which are funded by some funding body like Horizon 2020. They actually never ask for the so-called non-objectives. That's quite interesting for me, because non-objectives is a very specific thing and is a very important thing also to cover. And in this case, for example, the non-objective would be that you say you don't want to have nuts, for example, in your recipe, because simply this person, your friend, for example, they want to make sure that people who might be allergic to nuts, they are simply on the safe side, so you will not put nuts in there. So in this case, you could, for example, define the non-objective of not putting nuts in your project, in your cake in this case. So non-objectives quite often neglected, but to my opinion, a very important thing also in a big research project, because non-objectives help you define the limitations of your project. So you do not have to put anything under non-objectives or define anything under non-objectives that is not logical, but there could be certain things that could be expected of your project. When we say, for example, here our project name is I bake a cheesecake for a friend, then some people might think that actually you are responsible for all the dessert for the party. So here you could, for example, define, no, I'm just responsible for this one cheesecake with the 12 servings. I'm not the organizer of the party. I'm not the organizer of the overall buffet, for example. So with defining a non-objective, you simply set the limitations of your project, for example, for a client, also for your own team, also for somebody who is funding you, and simply define where does it stop and where do we basically also have plans. So for example, here it clearly says that this budget of €8 covers exactly this one cake and is not for any further dessert, for example. So this is actually a quite important thing. The other thing is, what I very often come across is the wording of an objective. And there are two ways of how you can word objectives. And it's very interesting that when we compare standard project management to, for example, project management of funded projects, funded by Horizon, then there's a very different way of people wording it. And it's the same what we can do here with our cheesecake project, actually. We can say that we word the objective, the aim is to bake a cake. Then actually, if you think about it, the focus is on the baking part because the whole activities is about baking. While actually the aim or the objective would be, in our case, and here it's easy to understand, is the aim is to have a cake at the end. So the aim is not the baking itself. The baking itself is a process which contributes to you achieving your goal of having the cake in the end, but the overall goal of your project is the cake and having the cake delivered to your friend. This is quite interesting because very often when we talk about research projects, we are talking about the aim of the project or the goal of the project is the development of a solution, the development of a new product, and very often it's not the product itself or the solution itself. There is no discussion on what is right or what is wrong. It depends on simply on your project, and it depends very much also on the people you have involved in your project. When the people understand that when you say, I will bake a cake, that the result and the aim of the project will be obviously the cake and not the process of baking the cake, then this is okay. Be careful when you talk about your project and your goal is, for example, the solution, or your goal is only the development. So be very specific here, also in the communication of those objectives and the wordings of those objectives. So this would be, in brief, the initiation. We now know why we are doing this. We have defined the objectives of our project. We have agreed on the objectives of our project. We have agreed on the budget of our project and the time of our project. So we can continue now with the detailed planning of the project. And when we look here, we have here three very interesting things which are very important for the planning. One thing which is for projects from a certain degree of complexity onwards, very important is the so-called work breakdown structure. The other thing which you actually need for every project is obviously the resources needed. And here they used as a third one, they used a PERT flowchart, which gives you an overview on the process itself. So the PERT chart is just one further chart which you can use. You could also, for example, use a Gantt chart. Here simply in this example, we are using a PERT chart. Let's focus on the so-called work breakdown structure first. The work breakdown structure, for those of you who hear this for the first time, is the subdivision of the project work into so-called work packages. Work packages are packages of similar tasks, similar activities that lead to a certain output and help you in implementing your overall project and achieving your results. They are usually process-oriented, and they usually follow step-by-step approach, although a lot of those steps are actually running in parallel. When we look at the example here of the cheesecake baking, you can see here that we have the 4 main activities as top work packages here. We have our preparatory work, we have the cooking itself, we have the topping, and in the end, the delivery, because we don't only want to bake it, but we also want to have it delivered to our friend. So as you can see, we have packaged now the overall activities which we will need to achieve the project goals into 4 packages, 4 work packages. And under that, we have so-called sub-work packages, or other people also call it tasks. In the correct project management terminology, these would be also work packages, so those are sub-work packages. And as you can see here, we have actually all the steps which are required here under the 4 main work packages. Very important thing is to give always those work packages a very descriptive title, so that everybody who is actually seeing the plans, that might be somebody from your team, for example, they clearly know what actually this work package is all about. And obviously, when I have a project about cheesecake and it says preparation, then most people will quite well know that in the preparation there might be some activities which have to do with the mixing of the ingredients. If they are more familiar with a cheesecake, then you might know that you need a filling, that you need a crust. Everybody, when you talk about cooking or you name a work package cooking, they will know what actually all this cooking should be all about. So it's very important to have a proper title for it. Usually, you would also give the responsibilities to someone for this work package. So you have leaders and contributors of such a work package. You usually also have a duration, and you have resources allocated to this. Resources, it's also in times of financial resources. In our case here, clearly also really like physical resources, eggs, flour, the oven. So you have also actually equipment allocated to it. And usually at the end, you also have outcomes, you have deliverables to it, and you have also so-called milestones to it. Let's talk about deliverables and milestones for a moment. Deliverables, that's results and outputs. So it's quantifiable and verifiable outputs of your project. You have to agree on those, and you usually also add certain quality criteria to it. Looking at the project here, for example, one clear delivery obviously is at the end of the topping work package, obviously the cake in the end. So the ready cake, which it was agreed that you will deliver it, you have to deliver it in a certain quality. As we mentioned before, there was the request for fruits to be inside. In here, you also see that there should be the topping on top of it. So in the end, you have certain quality criteria to it. The deliverable will be the cake. And there are obviously also interim results. You have, for example, when you look at the preparation work package, there will be clearly one deliverable, one output will be the crust, the other output will be the filling. All those outputs that contribute to the overall process. One thing which some people who haven't heard of milestones before have sometimes an issue of differentiating between the deliverables and milestones. Milestones, well, I guess those of you who know a little bit about history know that a milestone, that was really something physical that was put on the side of the street. So when you were walking on the street and you saw that milestone there, then you knew where you are, and if you've made a plan. So for example, you wanted to reach that milestone within 2 hours, and you've reached it within 2.5 hours, then first of all, you know you're on track because you've reached that specific stone there. Plus, in addition, you can assess if you've reached it within the time you wanted to do. So in the project management terminology, milestones are time critical results, which are necessary to continue with your work. In our project here, for example, in the cheesecake making, a very important milestone obviously would be here, for example, when you look at the second work package at the cooking, here you see that the first sub work package is the heating of the oven. Well, you can imagine that a heated oven is a quite important thing. So if you've defined, for example, that the oven has to be heated to 250 degrees, then, or 150 degrees, this is a clear milestone which you have to reach before you can continue your work. So in this case, if you wanted to define the milestone, then it would be oven is heated to a certain temperature after a certain time. because it takes you a while to prepare the crust, to prepare the filling, but you might not want to have the crust and the filling standing around for hours. So you probably have to find a certain time at which time this oven has to have the right temperature. Wonderful. The next thing, very important, the resources needed. Quite interesting, obviously, for the baking of the cheesecake. You have obviously very typical resources which you would use for the cooking. Things which people sometimes forget is that actually also the time. So persons involved, for example, here, they are also obviously part of the resources. You have to make sure that for this process, for example, here for this project, that we have people available, that they are physically there and also have time for you, who know how to bake a cake. This might be yourself, this might be somebody else, but those, in this case, 2 persons, they are a resource which you need to fulfill your project. In addition, what you would also need here, for example, is obviously also the oven. So you also need, in this case, certain equipment. And depending on your project, this can be very different equipment. This can be bigger equipment. In our case, it would be obviously the oven. It would be, in our case, also a refrigerator in the end, where we can then cool our cake. As you can see also here, a mixer. So it's a combination of really things you need, the ingredients, but it's equipment and personnel which you will need for fulfilling your project. And this is actually really also what we have to do with bigger projects, that we have to differentiate and define those resources which we need, and also make sure that those resources are available at the time when we want to implement our project. Another chart which we have here is the so-called PERT chart. As I said, this is just a selection of another chart. We could have also taken, for example, a Gantt chart, but here they took a PERT chart. PERT charts are quite interesting to define the single steps next to each other, and especially define the so-called critical path. So the critical path is that path that runs through the whole project, and where basically the whole project is depending on. As you can see here, for example, we have here, for example, under step 1, the mixing of the crust, that takes only 15 minutes, and then the pan has to be prepared, and next to it there can be the mixing of the filling, which takes far longer, so it's not critical. But mixing the crust plus preparing the pan, laying the crust, those are the critical steps which you have to follow to fulfill your project. Good. So this was not just some plans which you can use for your project here. Again, there are several other plans which you can use, but for these ones, those 3 were basically taken. Good. So we have done our project planning, and now we can really do our project implementation. And we look at the project implementation here. We have basically all those steps which you've seen before in the work breakdown structure, but also in the PERT chart. And here now you really do what has to be done. You start with heating the oven. Again, I mentioned already the oven temperature. That would be a clear milestone that this temperature is reached. Then you go through the whole process of making your cheesecake. You prepare your crust, you prepare the filling, you mix it together, and so on. And then in between, you have the interim outputs. Here, for example, when you look at step 4, you have done, you fill the pan and the crust, so you have a certain interim result. This is not the ready-to-go cake, but this is an interim result which you need to achieve to continue your work. Furthermore, under point 5, you see, for example, here another milestone that would be the quality control. So you would check here the quality of your cake during the process of baking every 16 minutes. And having the quality which you expect at a certain time here, that would be a milestone. So for example, if you haven't heated up the oven to the right temperature, or you maybe didn't put the cake on the right layer, so it's maybe not heating properly, then you would see that you're not able to achieve your milestones. You're not able to achieve a certain degree of readiness during the different quality controls, and then you haven't achieved your milestone. Then you have to change something, either, for example, put the cake on a different layer, or change, for example, the temperature. Furthermore, looking at point 7, for example, here you pack the cake in a box. So you have then really here the final result. It's packed here. That is your main outcome of the project. And then you deliver it to your friend. And then you have again a milestone. So having your ready cake delivered to your friend, and your friend has received the cake, that is your ultimate final milestone of your project. And that basically tells you, I've achieved my results, and we're basically more or less done with the project, at least from your side. Because afterwards, as you can see here in the overview, we have still the project controlling and the project evaluation. When we look at the evaluation and the review, here you have your standard question, which you ask yourself, why are we actually doing this? Evaluation and controlling is a very important step because it helps you to identify any deviations, and it helps you to do replanning. That could be, for example, as I mentioned before, with the temperature of the oven. So it could be that you identify deviation because you thought you've turned it on 150 degrees, but it's actually on 120. That influences obviously the time of your of the baking. So then there could be two ways of either you increase it to 150 degrees and then add the additional time you needed because there was a delay, or you leave it on 120 degrees and you do the whole replanning, and it might take you significantly longer to bake your cake. So then you have to do, in terms of the project timing, you have to do a replanning. Very important thing is also that you do it as a part of the documentation. The documentation is important to probably your project sponsor. It's probably also important for yourself. You would like to have your lessons learned documented. It might be that this is your first cake or the first cheesecake you're making, so you would like to have it documented. So you document the interim steps, that for the next time when you're baking your cake and you're encountering similar challenges, then you have it already documented. What can we control, or what can we review, evaluate? That's on the one side, it's the time. So in this case, you said you would like to invest 7 hours and I think it was 40 or 30 minutes. So this you can assess, and you probably have done interim steps. So you know that preparing the filling takes you half an hour, preparing the crust takes you 1 hour, heating the oven takes you a certain time. So you can control that and see if you are within the frame of what you've planned. Same comes obviously with the finances. So it might be that you've spent those €8 on all those ingredients, but then all of a sudden you drop a couple of eggs, so you have to go to your neighbor and get some more eggs, and maybe you have a very, well, not so friendly neighbor and it doesn't give it to you for free, so you might have to pay for it. So that then changes your budget. That changes that actually, it doesn't change your budget, it changes your costs, so that you have to calculate and see if you can deal with that. If you can afford another €1 or €2 for those eggs, which your neighbor wants to, will probably ask for it. So you have to do this financial controlling. You have to also, and that's a very important step, to check the quality of your output. That's why I said at the beginning, it's very important that deliverables, that outputs have some sort of quality criteria. That might be, for example, the consistency of the crust you're preparing. That might be the consistency of the filling you're preparing. That might be the color of the crust, for example, or in the end, obviously, the taste of the cake itself. So there are certain quality criteria you would add to every single deliverable, and which you can obviously control and evaluate. Very interesting thing is also that you can do, that doesn't only concern small projects like this, but this concerns actually also bigger projects. You can do some sort of social controlling. In these terms, for example, you have two people working on the cake, so you could actually check if they worked well together. And if you would have the time, and if that would be a very serious project, then you could see if this working together works perfectly, or if, for example, one person is bossy, or if one person is lazy, or if the communication doesn't work. Might be that you have international friends and you have one friend from somewhere in South America and they don't speak very good English, and then you have a communication issue. So in the social controlling, this would occur, then you would see that, and then you could see how you could deal with those projects. In bigger teams, obviously, social controlling absolutely makes sense because it can significantly influence actually the results and the overall processes and the success of your project. Who is actually doing this controlling and evaluation? This could be done, first of all, internally, so in your team. When I said you have to check, for example, the consistency of your filling, then that would be most likely done in your team. If you're checking the temperature from your oven, that would be also done in your team. But for example, the final evaluation, the tasting, that would be done obviously by your friends. So they would cut the cake, they would give you feedback on how this cake tastes, and that's then basically the external evaluation where it gives you feedback on the achievement of your goals and if everybody is happy in this case. The timing itself, obviously there is interim controlling, so the filling, the crust, the temperature, the freezing, whatsoever, that you would do interim, so in the duration, during the duration of the project. And obviously the final tasting, that would be done after the project ends. So there is always the interim controlling and usually the final evaluation, and then you know if your project was really successful or if you have to change something. Good. So with this, we have baked a cake covering the very basic steps of project management, hopefully in a way that it gives you an idea, at least for those of you who had no experience or who have never heard about those basic project management terminology. As I said, the IPMA has several different presentations about this. They have different member organizations, different countries. So it might be interesting for you to check those member associations out and see if you are interested to join one of their MAs to get further information about project management, about project management training and certification. So from my side, that's it. I'm open to any questions. Lina, are there any questions?
Yes, we have a few questions. One from Catherine Flynn. Would you have to justify why a cheesecake and not some other kind of cake in your objectives?
This is a very good question. Depends on the case, I would say, because if the overall goal is to bake a dessert, and then you come up with the suggestion, I make a cheesecake because I have everything here, then you would actually achieve the overall goal of preparing a dessert. If the overall goal would be that they like a cheesecake, and then you want to go with something different, then you would have to justify why you want to do something different. You can compare that, for example, to Horizon 2020 projects, where the European Commission leaves you quite a lot of freedom. They ask you, you have to solve this or this issue, and leave you a lot of freedom of how you want to solve it. And as long as you're solving it and you're justifying how you're solving it, then it's okay. But if they're asking for a specific solution, so if they're specifically asking for cheesecake and you want to do something different, then you have to just justify why you're doing something different.
Another one from Catherine. I'm surprised that the project finishes with a milestone and not a deliverable. Is this common?
Sorry again?
I'm surprised that the project finishes with a milestone and not a deliverable. Is this common?
It finishes actually, let me go back. Let me see here. As you can see, it finishes actually, the last deliverable is putting the cake in the box and then having the box ready for delivery. So there is no further physical deliverable there because the box is already there, and having it delivered is then the last milestone. So there is simply no final physical deliverable here because the deliverable was achieved in step 7, and the last step is achieving the milestone. And this is exactly what very often is, that deliverables and milestones are very closely linked to each other. Deliverables is usually a physical thing, or could be also a digital thing, and the milestone is having something achieved, so having it in this case delivered. Good.
Then we have a question from Marlene Vestra. Do you review and evaluate after the project or during the project?
I would say this quite clearly depends on the sort of project. If you, for example, in this case, have a very, let's say, suspicious, you have a friend who would like to really control your process, they really want to make sure that you're making a good cheesecake, then your friend could, for example, ask for an interim evaluation. So he's maybe or she is coming by at the middle of your project and is evaluating how far you have come with your project, what you have already achieved, and how the quality of your interim deliverables is. So that could be possible. In most of the cases, here, for example, I guess most of the people would just do the final evaluation. But it could be also done on an interim basis, absolutely.
Then we have the next one. From the example given in wording of objectives, which of the objectives is passive and active?
With passive, I meant in this case, it's the cake. So it's not the process. And active, I meant it's the baking itself, so the activity itself. The cake itself is a deliverable. It's a passive thing, and baking the cake is the active process of baking, and that is the difference between having the active process of baking as an objective or having the passive, the cake itself as an objective.
Mm-hmm. Then the next one is from Susan Jacob. Will any of the objectives change if the cake was produced on a mass scale in a factory?
Well, that's a very good, very good question. Probably depends on the project you would like to do that. For example, if you as a company are not doing the delivery, then probably it would be just the cake that is the objective and not the delivery. This simply depends then how you then define your objectives and how you define the overall aim of the project. If you say like you are producing, I don't know, 300, 400, 1,000 cakes per day, and you're also delivering it, then with a slight rewording of the objectives, yes, you could very much simplify your project and say like it's not delivering one cake, it's not producing one cake, it's then producing 300 cakes and delivering 300 cakes, maybe to then in this case not to a friend, but probably to a store. Or if you are directly delivering, as you are maybe a small bakery, you're delivering directly to your clients, then you simply have to define that. Again, this is then very much simplified, because I guess if you're doing this in a big scale, then you would have more than those two objectives, because there would be probably additional objectives, specific ones related to quality and so on.
Mm-hmm. Then from Florin, what planning format would you suggest when preparing a cheesecake when you work with 2 or more people?
Planning format. What do you mean with planning format? Do you mean plans or do you mean templates?
Gantt.
Yeah.
Again, if it's talking about the plans, if you talk to me as a project manager, yeah, and we're talking about, this is a very simplified example. If we're talking about the project of making a cheesecake, I suggest a simple to-do list. So according to standard project management, making a cheesecake does not need high quality project management. This is simply a simple example of it. If you're asking, if you want to make a cheesecake like in reality, then you would probably do it with a simple to-do list. This is a very important thing about project management. There are tons of tools there, but all those tools should actually support you. So they should not create additional unnecessary work. So if you ask myself, for simple activities such as baking a cake, you would usually use a to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Then the next question, I don't see from who it is, but it says, I would like to ask about the establishment of the objective. How could you identify the objective if the circumstances might change in the future? In in this cheesecake case, what if the number of friends want cheesecake increased during making it?
Absolutely. This is the typical issue of project management. You start with a plan. You can do only the planning on the basis of the information you have. So in case you're expecting more friends, and you know that from the beginning that the number of friends might vary between 12 and, I don't know, 15, then you either have to see if you want from the beginning to produce a bigger cake, or you buy enough resources to cook more, or you decide, in this case, maybe a bit of an unfair way, you simply decide that in the end you do a controlling before you do the cutting into 12 servings, and ask your friend, so now do you already know, will it be 12 friends or 15 friends? And if there is an update, then you can change the objective, update the objective, and cut the cake into 15 pieces, for example. If this is something you don't know at the beginning, for example, if it's clearly communicated that it will be 12 friends, and during the course of the project it turns out that it will be 15 friends, then you have to change everything. Then it simply depends on in which step of the process you are. Are you still in a process where you, for example, can simply include more ingredients and increase the volume of the filling, increase the volume of the crust, for example? Or is, for example, the cake already in the oven and baking? And then you probably have to decide if you buy more resources and make another second small cake, or if in this case you have to outsource, for example, this activity and buy a second small cake, or if simply they have to buy ice cream and do something completely different. It simply then depends on the situation you're in, what you have achieved so far. So you can't, obviously, once the cake is in the oven, there's not much you can change about this. Then you have to find different ways of coping with the new objectives.
The next question from Natalie: why isn't buying the ingredients not included as step of the project? Buying the ingredients.
It seems that in this case they are working with ingredients they already have. I totally agree with you that this could be also one part of the project itself. So if you've defined that you don't have those ingredients at home, then clearly there would be one work package here. For example, you see in the slide I have at the moment, then you would probably have one additional work package, which means shopping, for example. In this case, it was simply not included because it seems that the ingredients were at home. But I agree, if you don't have the ingredients at home, or maybe you don't have all the equipment, for example, you don't have a mix at home, then there would be an additional work package which says shopping and where you have to buy those ingredients.
The next one from Michaela: how do we know as less experts how to properly set the right resources, work packages, milestones, etc.?
Well, that's the issue, why you usually involve somebody then with experience. If you don't have anyone with a lot of experience, it depends on, for example, let's stick with the example of the cheesecake. You would probably ask, and this is not a funny one, you would probably ask your mother. So your mother probably knows how to bake a cheesecake. If you've never done it before, you would probably ask her for advice. So you would get an additional expert that advises you on the project activities and gives you some input. Still, then you have to do your own plans, and the plans might not work out perfectly, but that's why you're doing the documentation, so that you have the lessons learned and can do it better in the future. But it's the usual thing. You have to either try it out if you have absolutely no expertise. This could be with some research projects where you, for example, you really don't know how this will be going, or you try to find somebody in your company or here in your family, in your group of friends who already has experiences and can advise, and then probably even review interim plans. If this is all about not knowing which plans are there, then I clearly have to say that then you have to go through project management training, or you hire a project manager, or you also try to read about project management. I always advise to simply then go to further project management training that gives you additional ideas on plans you could, for example, use in your project planning.
From Martin, can you please give more explanation on the importance of the packaging material on the final outcome of the Cheesecake project?
Well, if we make it complex, then obviously that could be also a requirement that there is that this was required, that this is biodegradable, for example. Haven't done it here, but absolutely, if we want to make it more complex, and your friend says I'm a very sensitive person, I would like to have really biodegradable packaging, then this would be communicated, and this would be then, for example, involved here in the deliverable, which we achieve in work package 7, where we then have the cake plus the packaging material that has to be biodegradable. So yes, this can be clearly additionally defined and would probably go in as a quality criteria of deliverable, or if it's highly important, even one of the specific objectives of the project.
Mm-hmm. From Natalie, are there specific tools for identifying the milestones? I can imagine that in complex projects it might become more complicated to know which are the milestones.
Usually what we see in our project, it's up to the discussion. Thank God in our project it is to a certain degree logical what the milestones are, because it are really those results or those steps where you have to make decisions. But I totally agree with, if bigger projects, this can be very, very complex. To my understanding, there is no tool to help you identify milestones. It's just you see it in the planning. So if you use the normal planning tools and then you identify certain steps where you see several activities, especially time critical ones, coming together, then that's where you usually put a milestone. Usually it depends on the experience of a project manager to identify why you have to set a milestone. I personally don't know any tool that helps you really like say this has to be a milestone. If there are any, I simply don't know. It might be that there are any. I personally don't know any of those tools.
That was the last question in the row.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Paola has a question.
I have a question. Maybe I didn't write to all. Sorry. I think that is rather important also in the framework of the food factory for us teams. How is important the development of the team that is involved in the project, and if it's possible, obviously, if there are options, what strategy apply to this aim?
Mm-hmm. Usually when you form the team at the beginning, then you would obviously first of all look for the skills you need within the project. In this case here, I would need somebody who probably knows about baking a cake. So the skills, the knowledge, that's a very important part. But then there are those phases of the team building. This what was it? Norming, storming, performing, forming, norming, storming, and performing. So teams usually go through those phases where you put them together, you see how they work together, you give them their tasks. Then you see if the people are really happy or capable with the task. You see the interaction between the people. And then you also do here some sort of social controlling. So you see if things work out or things don't work out. And if there are issues, could be, for example, that simply one person is not capable for a certain task or doesn't want to do a task and somebody else is significantly better. Or that there might be, as I mentioned before, there might be language barriers. So you have to identify those things and see how you can cope with those. This might be by simply discussing it. Very often, especially when we talk about small teams, very often with discussion, with communication, a lot of things can be solved. In bigger projects, then usually there has to be maybe a team member replaced or extended, or maybe get a further education on certain things, or you have to change things like, for example, the working language. Maybe this was before in Italian, the whole team was discussing in Italian, and you have one person who's not a native speaker, and then you have to switch to English. For bigger projects, sometimes or very often they also call for external help to go through those phases of the team building.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
There was another question. Is it more important knowledge or attitude of the team members? What can cause major problems?
This is a very interesting question because there are lots of discussion going on that. There are certain people who do, for example, a project management education, and they know all about the plans, they know everything, they are experts in that, but they will never be good project managers and will never be good team members because they don't have the right attitude. So for me, attitude is something really, really important. If people have the right attitude and have also the willingness, for example, to gain further knowledge and further experience, then I would say that attitude is significantly more important than skills. It simply then depends on your project, obviously. If you are starting right away and this person has never ever hold a spoon in their hands, and they're completely incapable of holding a spoon, having the right attitude, they are friendly, they are happy to contribute to your project, but you can't use them at all because of the lack of the skills, then obviously that is a criteria that excludes this person. But overall, I still would say attitude over skills, but in the end, it's a combination of both of it.
Good. Then I don't have any other questions. Do you have any comments, Paola?
No, well, just as closing words of this webinar that I really found interesting, and also offering very good hints for who is actually dealing with the project in making a project. And I really hope that the teams which are already now participating to the project, to the Food Factory for Us, are here and could have also the opportunity also to watch the recorded version, because sometimes some words and also parts can be being lost during the presentation. So for who is interested, obviously the recorded version would be important. I found also as let's say as a project coordinator really interesting the webinar, and I really hope that each of us will has learned something from this webinar today. Just a big thank to Rainer, and that's all from my side.
Good. Then, as I said in the beginning, you will find the recorded version and the presentations on the FoodStar website, which we will also send in a link in the follow-up email. Okay, well, and then thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.